Hello and welcome to Thank You for Your Service. My name is Tom Heiser and I will be your host. Today we'll be talking with Joe Zurfluh, who is an Army veteran, who's involved in Operation Joint Guardian in Kosovo and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Joe, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, start out, Joe. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you went to school.
Sure, I'm from Port Edwards, just south of town here. I went to parochial school through grade school, and then John Edwards High School for high school. Graduated in 2000. Immediately after high school, I went into active duty with the Army. My basic training was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I'm getting ahead of myself there. But yeah, that was just typical, I guess, upbringing from town here.
Okay, so you said you went in the Army
Mm-hmm.
right after school.
Yep.
No trade school, and why the Army?
Well, I talked to a couple different recruiters. I did talk to a Marine Corps recruiter, National Guard recruiter, and then I guess I don't really remember ultimately what sold me on the Army. I did think about some other branches. I thought about the Navy, I thought about the Air Force, and I guess I just decided to settle on one of the land forces. Not really any particular reason, I guess, but active duty sold me basically because I wanted to see part of the world, and you know, as necessary as the reserve and guard components are, I knew that, you know, you come back home and then you go to college, usually start a job, and maybe get deployed. But I wanted to actually go somewhere, so that's ultimately why I decided on active duty, at least.
Okay, so you decided to go active in the Army. Where'd you do basic?
Leonard Wood, Missouri.
In spring, summer, fall?
August. August is when it started, and it was, I think, 90-some degrees when we got there. Very humid, kind of like the worst summer day here. So that struck me right away, obviously. Winter was surprisingly easy to tolerate, though.
Small town Port Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Big change. Big difference.
Yeah, it's a decent sized post. I didn't get to see a lot of it, of course. My particular MOS did what they call one station training, so my basic and AIT were the exact same. Drill instructors, same bunks, everything. So
Small town USA. Now you're mixed in with people from every state. Interesting, scary.
Culture changed, that's for sure. Different people have different values. That was obvious. Of course, as basic progresses, you all, you know, as different as you are, you all come together. So by the time you graduate, you know, you're really good friends with all these people. So,
did you go in alone or did you go into a buddy system with somebody else?
I didn't do the buddy system, but I did enlist with a friend of mine from high school that I graduated with, and we actually ended up being in the same platoon for basic. He actually bunked right next to me, so it was good how that worked out. I had someone I knew and could talk to throughout all basic training.
So you at least had a safety net, so to say. You had somebody that you could go to.
Right.
Because now you're in with people from New York City and the large cities, and this is small town USA.
Right.
In Wisconsin.
Right.
Okay. So you get down, you said one station. So you went to basic at Leonard Wood. What was your MOS that you...
Military police.
MP, okay. So that training was again at?
Fort Leonard Wood. So basic is 8 weeks, of course. I don't remember what day of the week it ended, but literally the next day we went from green phase into black phase. So that was the first half of advanced individual training, which for MPs at that time anyway, they've changed the MOS. I went in a 95 Bravo, and now it's a 31 Bravo, same job, but at that time at least we had garrison functions that we were trained for, which is your typical kind of law enforcement role. You know, in the squad car on base, And then we also had a combat support phase, which was taking care of POWs, doing presence patrols, which I found out later that really was my primary job, at least with the units that I ended up with.
So you have a basic law enforcement training, and that included going off base if there's firefights involving the military. So you just weren't on Fort Leonard Wood property as such. You were out in the community as well.
To some extent, we did patrol off-post housing, not on Leonard Wood, of course, where I trained, but ultimately when I was stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana, there was off-post housing. So the sheriff's department there was Vernon Parish, and if it was an incident off-post that involved a military member, or if it was at our housing, then we would respond and handle it.
So you graduated Leonard Wood, and then you went to Fort Polk with your first duty station.
Correct.
A little warm down there, I understand.
I thought Missouri was hot. Louisiana is a whole nother level. You're, 45 minutes from Lake Charles, which is on the Gulf. So very warm, very extremely muggy. The humidity was the hardest thing to get used to. Even in the winter, the humidity makes it feel colder than what it is. So it just amplifies everything. And it can be a bright, sunshiny day, and all of a sudden it rains for 15 minutes. It seems to come out of nowhere, but a lot of critters too I wasn't used to.
So was your initial enlistment 3 years or 4 years?
It was actually 2.
2 years.
The day that me and my friend, because we were gonna initially look into the buddy system that the Army offered at the time. This is February of 2000, prior to graduation. On the way down, my recruiter had let it slip that they had just started offering 2-year enlistments, if you scored such a score on your ASVAB. So my intent, just prior to hearing that from them, was to sign up for 5 years, which was the standard basically for at least the MOS. But once I found out they'd offer a 2-year, I thought, well, I'll do that, and if I like it, I'll just re-enlist. So I ended up doing that, but I ended up serving 3 years due to a stop loss.
Okay, so now you're Fort Polk. Now you're in the real world of law enforcement or MP. You said you're going off base and things like that, and the critters. What do you remember most about Fort Polk besides the heat?
Well, when I got down there, it was February 9th, 2001, day after my birthday. That's how I remember that. And the thing I remember most from my entire time there was on September 11th of that year. We were actually in the field. We did phases. We did a red phase, which was like your road garrison work, and then yellow phase was, whatever, usually getting ready to go to the field. And then we did like a green phase where we would go in the field and maybe spend 4 days there or a week or whatever. But we were in the field, and I remember it was late morning by, I guess, Army standards. And I remember we came back to the talk, and our sergeant major was there, our first sergeant was there, along with our company commander, and there was just a solemn attitude going on. And I went into the tent, and they had brought in actually TVs and everything, and we were watching basically the terror attacks unfold. By then, all the planes had already come down from wherever they happened to be, and the whole atmosphere, my entire term of service was totally different from that point on than it was prior to that day. So obviously that's something that's going to stick in your mind when but there obviously wasn't a desire to join because I was already in, but there was a completely different attitude and mindset for all of us, I think.
When you say a different mindset, well, I'm here to do my job, and all of a sudden you're on more of a heightened alert, I would assume would be the mindset part of the mindset you're discussing?
Correct, and I'm sure that was consistent no matter when you served, whenever anything happened. But initially, and I can only speak for myself, of course, but it was, I'm going to do my time, decide whether I want to get out or re-enlist, and then that after September 11th, we were already scheduled to deploy to the Balkans, and one of our other units then eventually ended up deploying to Afghanistan while we were in the Balkans. So now you guys had a real sense of, okay, purpose, you know, and I'm not saying that, you know, you take your training seriously because you never know, you know, where the military is going to send you or where you're going to be needed, but you just kind of knew, okay, you're going somewhere. So.
With a heightened attitude.
Correct.
Now you're upset.
Upset is a good word. I'm, you know, mad, you know, that this happened, and all kinds of emotions, you know, which our entire country felt at that time.
Now it became real.
Right.
Okay, so you're done at Fort Polk. You're talking about being deployed. September 11th has occurred. Deployment is coming. Change in attitude? Skeptical? Cautious? Fear? All the above?
All the above. I would say it. And anyone, maybe there are people who aren't scared, but I was 19 years old, first deployment. I had never been out of the country prior to this. We, in October 2001, we left Alexandria, Louisiana. Let's see, where did we stop? We flew into Shannon, Ireland. And then from there, we landed in Greece. And Greece sticks in my mind because the plane had to refuel. No one deboarded in Greece. But I remember a whole bunch of what I assume were probably federal police or maybe military were on the tarmac as the plane was being refueled, basically surrounding it. I don't know if that was standard, if it had something to do with, you know, the current events or what, but I just remember noticing that. And as soon as the plane was gassed up and ready, we left and we landed in Skopje, Macedonia, and from there went into Kosovo and did our deployment for 9 or 10 months.
So now you guys, a whole plane load of troops. You noticed that. Other people noticed it. What was the feeling on the plane when you're kind of seeing this? I mean, there's got a lot of skepticism, I would assume.
Oh yeah, it was a civilian plane, contracted or whatever, and civilian pilots and staff. I remember we kind of joked when they were serving one of the first meals. They had made the announcement, and we had our rifles and everything, and so they said, "Make sure your firearms are out of the aisle so we can, you know, serve you." And I just kind of laughed, like, you won't hear that on a civilian plane, you know. But yeah, it was quiet, you know. We knew where we were going, had nothing to do directly with 9/11 or the terror attacks or anything. It was a 3 Bravo rotation, so it was the third year, I believe, since Slobodan Milosevic was basically unseated. It was a NATO deployment, so, you know, we weren't going to Afghanistan or Iraq at that time, but we knew, you know, any deployment from here on out is just different.
So you're going over there. You had a lot of prep time preparing while you're still at Fort Polk. You got, what, 2 or 3 months of prep time
Oh, more than that, yeah.
to go over there.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of that, if you can talk about what the training was? I'm quite sure some of it was classified, but what was that training like getting ready to go to Kosovo?
You basically, like I said, it was planned, so it was months that we would go to the field and we would just do what our mission was going to be in Kosovo, which my job was basically just presence patrols, which was driving around, doing foot patrols. We'd work 14 on, 1 off. So it was interesting. Of course, there's not much else to do in your free time, so you might as well work, right? But there was nothing real classified about what I did over there. Obviously, we trained for all kinds of different scenarios prior to deploying. But we went, I believe we spent 2 or 3 weeks in an old World War II style barracks to kind of simulate late training. So, you know, we were very well prepared for what our job was going to be.
So, countryside of Kosovo, pretty?
Beautiful. Probably, I can't think of a place I've been that I thought the countryside was better than there. At that time, there were still remnants of the conflict, the Civil War, basically, or genocide that occurred, in '99, late '90s, before NATO sent troops in. But you're up in the mountains. It's absolutely gorgeous country.
So you're doing patrol, two-phase patrol, watching your people and watching the citizens. Interesting, isn't it?
It was a police action, so that's what we did. We were there to protect everybody, basically. That was the job.
And under NATO command.
Ultimately, right. I was with at that time I was with the 209th MP Company. We were a FORSCOM unit. I wonder if I can remember what the battalion was. I don't want to guess and be wrong, but they were out of Seattle, I believe, Fort Lewis, or Washington. I believe it was a Fort Lewis battalion that we were under. And then the division ultimately was 10th Mountain.
So, being part of the NATO force, did you work with other countries, troops from other countries then?
We did. We interacted. Camp Bonsteel was a camp I was at. There were German troops there. I remember running into, I believe, some Irish troops. And the Kosovo was a province at that time. It wasn't its own country per se, like Bosnia was, or what are some of the others over there? Montenegro's over there, Macedonia. But Kosovo was divided up into sectors, and the U.S. had the south or east sector. It was divided up in, I want to say, 5 parts. Of course, this is quite a while ago.
But now you're working with these other troops. I bet that was interesting, interacting and meeting.
It was. Being on camp when you had downtime, we'd seek them out a lot of times and talk and shoot the breeze.
Ever continue contact with any of those other troops from any of the countries?
Not any of the other troops. I did maintain some contact with my interpreter over there. We were, of course, assigned an interpreter who spoke both Albanian and Serbian, because depending what town you're in, if it's a Serbian town, you need to know Serbian, and if it's a Albanian town, then obviously at that time they didn't mix and match very, very well. So
the interpreter was pretty good because he had 3 languages.
She, right?
Mm-hmm. She had 3 languages. Okay.
Very good, very fluent.
Very interesting. So you're out traveling the countryside while you're working. You said it's very pretty.
It is. One of the concerns, though, of course, was landmines. That part of the world has had, conflict going way back, World War I and before. So these aren't all new landmines, but that was one of the biggest things, was just being wary of where you were, because there were a lot of uncleared areas, and of course, who knows what they did. I don't think it was a surprise to them that NATO sent troops. So, that was just always a concern. There were no incidents that way while I was over there, so that was a good thing.
So you're over there, coming from the United States, the New World. This is the old country.
It was a culture shock. Never been, like I said, I went to Mall of America. I think it was the farthest I ever went before I joined. But we got a pretty good reception over there for the most part. Most of the people were very friendly and talked to us, and they knew why we were there. There was civilian police too. You'd go to a town and there'd usually be a station where CivPol, under the United Nations, contracts usually retired or at least law enforcement officers from the states that have experience for the states, any country. One town in particular, the CivPol officer was American, and we interacted with him regularly, and he had a national with him that was also the police force. So they would work together and basically enforce law. One is UN and one is a national of that area. So it gives a little more legitimacy to what you're doing.
But you even look at the structures. There were probably some buildings in your area that were built before 1492.
Probably. I didn't really research the area that well before I went over there. I looked at a map and kind of saw, but it wasn't actually until after when I, started taking quite an interest in the history that I found out about everything that happened over there beforehand, and just that general area of the world. So
how long was your deployment? A year?
Short of a year. I think it was 9 or 10 months. We left in October and we got back July, I believe. Maybe later in the summer. So
your enlistment is just about up.
It was just about up. Correct. I found out before I came back, like I said, summer of 2002, and I was due to either re-enlist or get out in August of 2002. And as it turns out, I knew before we came back that there was a big question mark on when I would get out. I knew I was stop lost. I knew it was probably going to be at least a year, but at that time we didn't really have a clue on how long.
When you say stop loss, you're talking about a term I'm unfamiliar with.
Sure. And I forget about that. a lot of people maybe didn't experience that or watching would know. But so when I sign up, it's 2 years. So basically, the Army says you'll be off active duty in August of 2002. You actually sign up for 8 years. Mm-hmm. So I would, if I chose to get out, then I would have to do 6 years in active reserve, basically being ready to be recalled. The stop loss basically says you're needed due to events, and you're not going to get out right when we initially said. We're going to retain you on active duty, and they can do that for as long as national security needs, basically. So they ended up eventually saying it was going to be a year, but when I found that out, I was on my second deployment, so it was another question mark whether or not I was actually going to be sent back or not, because the unit can choose to keep me too. So
you're back at Fort Polk, back in the world, or back in the States. How long were you there before they decided that you should go somewhere else?
Almost another 8 months, I would say. We knew we were going to get deployed, but we didn't know where and we didn't know when. And it wasn't until fairly shortly before that we got a hard date. When I say we didn't know where or when, I mean I didn't know where or when. I'm sure someone knew.
Higher up the food chain.
I'm sure, yeah.
Okay, so you're at Fort Polk and you know you're gonna go again. You're staying in contact with the family. What's going on in Joe's life at that time frame?
Well, I was getting ready to attend mid-state, I thought. I had already applied, or whatever you do, to attend a tech college. I knew there was I wanted to go into criminal justice, so I knew there was at that time about a 1 year wait. So I got ahead of the game, and knowing that, I signed up before I was off active duty.
You're planning ahead.
Right.
So you go to Fort Polk, you go to Kosovo, you come back. Did you come back to Fort Edwards at all during that time frame?
On leave. I took maybe 10 days or more after my Kosovo deployment. I came back, and I came back a couple other times. Bought a car here and drove it back. They started giving us a 4-day weekend once a month at some point in there. So I think once or twice I came home for 4 days, basically.
So I've talked to other veterans, and it's really interesting. You've been in the military, you've been to a war zone, Kosovo, and come back. Your friends from high school, Now it's a different feeling, isn't it?
It is. Some of them were the same. Some of them had changed quite a bit too through their experiences. But for me anyway, being gone and then you come back, it's almost like in my mind everything kind of paused when I was gone. You don't really think that everyone else's life keeps moving too. So things are different. It's you did this, or so and so is married now, or moved away, or whatever the case is. So,
Like I say, other veterans have mentioned quite a bit, maturity level, people that haven't been through the experiences that you have are interesting, to say the least.
yes. Sometimes that can work the other way too, depending on how you handle things. So.
I worked with your dad for years, and you're in that world. Interesting seeing their perspective also of the law enforcement field. That's
Yes.
where you wanted to go.
Right. That was what I decided on.
MP different than local law enforcement training?
Greatly, yes. You're still a soldier first and foremost as an MP, and there can be an interesting dynamic, with maybe infantry, Cav Scouts. Maybe look at MPs in a way that people think is similar to how people look at local law enforcement. I didn't really see a lot of that firsthand. Everyone seemed to, the military, you have that mutual respect. And now they seem to have gotten away from garrison law enforcement functions anyway. A lot of posts now have DoD contracted police. Most of them are reserve regardless, but reservists or in the guard. But they, they're civilian now, so you don't have that. One of the quotes that we were told never to say was, "Sir, don't confuse your rank with my authority." So, but going with a civilian police force on base, basically, I think was smart. For one, that's your full-time job. I don't know if I was prepared for law enforcement functions, after 9 weeks of training, but you learn quickly. Kind of have to.
Military law enforcement, civilian law enforcement training. Close sometimes, but real far apart to other times.
In theory, a lot of it is the same. I mean, you're enforcing rules, you're enforcing laws. The military, though, you have not only laws, which like our post adopted most of like Louisiana state laws. As I understand, that's mostly up to the post commander, but at the same time, the military takes care of it differently. For example, if you cited a person for, let's say, speeding, and they were a military member, that citation would go to their commander. It wasn't a money ticket or didn't have a court date or anything. A civilian, on the other hand, would have a fine amount, and they could go to court to contest it and everything. The military member couldn't really contest it. He could contest it to his commander, and that was how it was handled.
So take your writ.
Pretty much.
Okay, so now you're back, and you're getting ready for your second deployment. A little bit more of a war zone going to Iraq than Kosovo, or more of a police action versus a war, or what's the...
Yeah, I wouldn't classify that as a police action. So Bush was president at the time, and there was a lot of talk about Iraq, but we were not in Iraq. And somewhere along the way, I heard that we were going to Kuwait. This is, like I said, it's now early 2003. We had, our vehicles were sent over for our deployment and everything. It takes a long time by ship to get all that over there, but we finally got our orders or whatever. We were kind of on alert for a long time. You couldn't communicate about any specific details or anything of your deployment. We were just told to just tell our family we were deploying, not where or anything. And then it was March March 18th. We're leaving the next day. We finally have all of our personal gear that we're taking on the plane with us. And then early in the morning on March 19th, we depart, again, Alexandria, Louisiana, stopped at another base along the way, picked up a unit. Again, flew into Shannon, Ireland, seems to be a common place to stop. And it was while I was on the ground on Shannon, Ireland, I turned on my Walkman. You remember those? Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, oh, see what European radio is like. And I came across a BBC channel, and they had said that the U.S. had invaded Iraq. And maybe I missed a memo or somewhere along the way, but ultimately that's how I found out that the war had started. To my knowledge, it had not started prior to us departing Louisiana, but several hours later, when we landed, then I figured it out. So
in your mind, had things now changed?
Big time, because we kind of knew, but we knew that we probably were going to be in Iraq at some point. Maybe not us personally, but the U.S. Just the way things were being reported on the media, because contrary to popular belief, most of my information came from network news. You didn't ask anyone about it because you knew they couldn't say anyway, and you respected that, and you had to follow that too. So we were in Kuwait for a couple weeks, getting our equipment when it came in and getting set up, and then we headed north. And ultimately, I went to Baghdad, and that's where I remained for that entire deployment.
Kuwait, Louisiana, big difference.
Kuwait was much hotter, but also somehow more tolerable. There basically was no humidity, of course, being a desert. No trees, really. You're coming from almost the jungle, to now a desert. And we stayed in basically a tent city, so that was all. There were very few actual buildings where I was, or there might not have been any even. So
they say you're coming from a jungle to a desert. The transition training where you're getting ready to go over, how do they do that in a non-arid land that you're going to an arid land?
You pay attention more to the principles of what you're doing rather than the actual climate around you. Fort Polk is also Joint Readiness Training Center, JRTC. It's similar to NTC out in California, and then is it California or Nevada? I've never been out there. And then there's another big training center over in Germany. But I know prior to the Vietnam War, they sent, I believe a lot of people went through Fort Polk for basic training. I'm just going by what others have told me. You would know more about that. So, I guess Louisiana for that conflict was as close maybe as they could get in a pinch. But, there wasn't a lot to really adjust to climate-wise, but the urban environment was something that I guess I hadn't really anticipated. Baghdad is a huge city, and you're not used to that in Louisiana, especially when you're training in a big open training center. So
the sand, I hear so much about the sand.
Sand, yeah. Yep, it's in everything.
Still finding some?
I think it finally stopped. But Iraq happened kind of fast. When we got there, I didn't shower. There were no showers, so it was months, probably. Hot shower finally came in after several weeks. I actually like MREs, so that didn't bother me. Not everyone is that way, but.
Okay, so you're in the Middle East. You're getting ready to go into Iraq. The war is fresh. The war is new. Afraid? Scared? Nervous?
Yeah. Nervous mostly. The biggest fear was doing my job right. That was my biggest concern. Because you have other people, we weren't an infantry unit. We're combat support, but you don't want to let someone down. And just the unknown. I mean, I didn't know what how our mission was going to evolve, or ultimately, what was I going to be responsible for, that kind of thing. So.
Okay, so you're on your second deployment. You're moved up in rank a little bit. So now you're more in charge of people. How did that go now that you're in the chain of command a little higher?
Well, when I came back from the Balkans, I moved from the 209th MP Company over to Headquarters Detachment under the 519th MP Battalion. I was selected amongst the battalion to be the battalion commander's driver. So stateside, I had a pretty decent job. A lot of people joke about it. The process to be selected was competitive. You interviewed, you got judged by how pressed your uniform was, how shiny your boots were. I don't know why they picked me. Maybe they wanted to get rid of me. I don't know. But the Battalion Command Sergeant Major made the final decision. I got picked for the job. And stateside, I drove the colonel around to meetings and did whatever duties were necessary on that given day. Overseas, obviously now I'm the primary person responsible for his safety. He has a job to do. I had to drive him all over the city, and navigating in Baghdad, when you're used to navigating Fort Polk, two different animals. We call them roundabouts here. I call them traffic circles there because they're 4 or 5 lanes, and they're huge. And the traffic is a nightmare as well. So. And you're not in the green zone. Our living sleeping area was in the green zone, but then our talk was on a different part of the city. So you had to drive every day, drive in and out of secure areas through the general city, depending on where we had to go, who we had to meet with, because our battalion had a mission, each individual company. So I found myself as a specialist, being assigned a team. An MP team is 3 people: a driver, a team leader, and a gunner. And the team leader usually was a sergeant, but sometimes a staff sergeant, because generally a staff sergeant has been, is in charge of the squad then, and he has his own team as well. So sometimes I would be interacting with a sergeant or staff sergeant who I was actually giving direction to, because I had, the orders for the day, so to speak. So that was kind of interesting, having someone a higher rank than me come to me for, okay, what are we doing? What do you need from me? So, but the unit that was with us was I believe a guard unit, maybe reserve, out of Springfield, Missouri. I don't want to mess that up. Could be Illinois. Like I said, it's been a long time, but they were great guys and gals, and they made my life a lot easier.
So you're talking about driving in Baghdad, the explosives, the people trying to take you out, and you got the commander.
Mm-hmm.
You guys would leave on a moment's notice. Your routes and schedules weren't dictated.
Correct.
Would you leave in a convoy, or would it be just an individual vehicle or 2?
2 vehicles. So it'd be the colonel and I. We would have to be assigned a gunner, because we didn't have a gunner as his driver. So that this other company would pick basically 4 people in a vehicle, and I was always lead vehicle. So I was I would set all this up and then somehow figure out how to navigate through the city, which I'll admit was a nightmare for me. And then the trail vehicle for security. But that was it, just the 2 of us. Now at this point, though, the 3rd Infantry Division had already pushed north of the city. Initially, we were under the general war, the invasion, but when George Bush declared an end to major hostilities, that was also maybe halfway through my time in Iraq, at least. The IEDs kind of started coming out after this point, it seemed, but of course I'm just one person, and I don't know, everyone's experience is different. I'm sure it was a lot worse in some of the other areas, so especially north of the city.
So the vehicle that you drove, Hummer, or what were you guys in?
An M1114, one of the few up armoreds over there at the time, which we had from Fort Polk, so we brought that over with us.
So you said up armor, so it's a little bit more protective,
Correct.
but still could take a hit.
Yeah, nothing's perfect. Obviously, it's not an MRAP or one of these big personnel carrier vehicles that can, take maybe a significant impact. It was supposed to stop 7.62 rounds, which not my personal vehicle, but a different vehicle found out that the windows actually will stop those rounds. So a few anyway. Everything will fail at some point, but the idea was to protect the people inside. Similar to the vehicles we use now. In law enforcement, it's not an offensive vehicle; it's more defensive, really. Especially since you only have a saw at the time is all we had, a squad automatic weapon, 5.56 machine gun. That was your, you might have a Mark 19, but most of us just had saws.
So you got to get him from the headquarters to a meeting somewhere. You just blow through, don't you? You don't slow down for a lot of stuff.
Not a lot of things, but we were, you're still regulated. You still have rules of engagement that you have to follow. It often wasn't possible to do that though, because you would come along an area where it was just a complete traffic jam. And that was nerve-wracking because people were walking in all these cars. This is early in the deployment. You don't know who you can trust, who you can't. And you just have this state of hypervigilance, that they train you to have basically, and it was more mentally exhausting than anything else. But yeah, I remember being on the highway once and feeling my steering wheel start to vibrate, and 2 Abrams tanks passed me like I was standing still. So I don't know how fast those things can go, but it was pretty impressive. So.
But they said heightened awareness because you don't know who's who.
Right.
At all. So this traffic jam could fall apart, or it could be a real traffic jam.
Moment of opportunity, perhaps. Sure. There were times where, I would be on the gun at times because someone higher in rank than me might be in my vehicle, and they're not going to sit up there, so they end up driving. And you'd go around a corner or drive past a certain area, and you'd hear sometimes a single shot go off, and you just wonder, what that was about. Nothing. A lot of times there's so many buildings, it's almost impossible to tell where a lot of that's coming from, or if you're even the target. But
so you would relate Baghdad to, say, driving in Milwaukee with all the tall buildings.
Yeah, it's actually worse. Some of these, Solder City, for example, we were there one day, and it's basically an alley that you're in, and there's junk everywhere. I mean, it's not like they have zoning ordinances that are stringently enforced or anything. So, it's hard. There's people all over, civilians, children a lot of times. There's 3-story buildings next to you. Everything's echoing off of, someone yells, you're like, oh, where's that coming from? So, it was different. It was eye-opening for sure, but.
Baghdad, pretty city, or it's not war torn, or I've heard people say yes and I've heard people say no.
I didn't mind it. I thought it was I would call it a pretty city, sure. It's not mountainous, like the Balkans were. There's palm trees. There's the Tigris River flows through the center. It was really cool crossing the Euphrates River, because depending on your, I guess, biblical leanings, but supposedly about the area of the Garden of Eden. It's considered the cradle of civilization, basically, and that was really cool, seeing that part of the world. I'll probably never go there again, but it was. What struck me was the mosquitoes. You would think there wouldn't be any in the desert, but with the river, I guess they were bad enough to carry you away at times. But the civilians there, very nice folks. My interpreter over there, his family invited us in one day, actually made a meal for us. Very nice people. So
that area affluent, or is there also a very, very poor side?
very poor side. There's an area where it looks like basically a dump, garbage all over the place, but then there's like a soccer field in the middle of it. We're actually a decent soccer field, and kids playing and stuff, but then, kids are playing on garbage, and I remember driving past a dead horse. It was, the areas I was in most of the time, I wouldn't consider affluent, really. A lot of apartment buildings, things like that.
Once again, culture shock. People living literally day by day.
Right. I'll tell you, it makes you very proud of where you came from, and it gives you a whole new appreciation for, the upbringing that you have over here and the things that you have over here. When you go to a different part of the world like that, and you see, people that have nothing. So, it's my unit that I went to the Balkans with had actually just returned from a peacekeeping deployment to Haiti prior to my assignment with them, but and I heard stories from them about how poor of a country that is, and how that also gave them a whole new appreciation for what we have over here.
And like you said, the cradle of civilization. I mean, you've seen it. It's interesting.
It is. It is very interesting. The drive up there, I got to see a lot of basically the southern half of Iraq, and some parts are so flat you swear you can see the curve of the earth, But we drove through basically the vehicle graveyard from the first Iraqi conflict, Desert Storm. So we drove through that just north of the border where all those old vehicles are, and that was interesting to see too. I guess they just left them there, but so it's right along the main route heading north. So
interesting country.
It is. Yep. Overall, it was a good deployment. It was like I said, stressful, but ultimately worthwhile. So
a lot of people have said, veterans I talked to, this interesting conflict. We had to be there. And I mean, when I say that, we had to be there. And other people say we shouldn't. You saw it firsthand.
I think if you try to wrap your head around it, there's no answer. I mean, you could argue all day, was it worth it? Was it not worth it? We ousted Saddam Hussein. Then a little thing called ISIS came along, after, and maybe if we hadn't done that wouldn't have happened. I don't know. But if you try to hang, wrap your head around politics, I don't think you're going to achieve anything. It happened.
You did your job.
Right.
You did what you're supposed to do. Okay, so now you're getting ready to leave Iraq for small favors.
Yes.
You're ready to come home. Enlistment just about up now?
Yes, I finally found out while I was in Iraq that they had put stop loss at a year for most people, I believe, and at least for me. And the battalion commander was being reassigned to a different station, which is common in the military. So he was coming back stateside. So since I was his driver, I was coming back with him, and then I was gonna end my term of service from there. So still not real clear on dates. I think I found out 12 hours before that I was leaving. We drove to Baghdad International, spent the night there. Me and a handful of people came back. There's maybe 7 of us. A C-17 came in the next day with supplies and stuff, and after it was unloaded, just our small group went on that C-17. We left the ground, 100 some odd degrees. I remember the airman, because I can't remember his rank, offered me a blanket, and I said, "What are you not crazy? It's 100 some degrees down here." And, well, it's cold up there, so I kind of wished I would have taken him up on that. But then we landed in Germany for a night, so got to see Germany. So part of it.
Do you ever stay in contact with the commander that you drove at all?
No. But an interesting thing happened. Our brigade commander at that time was Fulbright Colonel Teddy Spain. And years later, with my job here at the county, I got sent on training to La Crosse. And the instructor was from, well, he's not native. He lives down in Texas now, but we were just talking one day, and I just happened to mention that I was, a former MP in the Army, and he just asked me if I knew Teddy Spain because he knows him personally. I said, "Well, no, I don't know him, but he signed an ARCOM for me." So, I'm friends with him on Facebook. He doesn't know me, but he knows that I served under him. I think he's got a lot of people that way, but no, I kept in touch with my interpreter from there a little bit, but not anything in recent years. So
you get out, come back to Port Edwards, go to school, correct?
Right.
Mid-state.
Graduated with an honor cord, believe it or not.
Your training in the military, discipline, background. The other students, how did you see some of them as, students, or were they kind of immature compared to what you had?
Depending on when you caught me, some of them might say I was. But, the law enforcement classes are relatively small. You start with a lot, but, by the time you graduate, you have, well, you're well aware, maybe half. It was different. For me, it was kind of a struggle because, a lot of people after high school, they're brand new adults and they get to go out and, act their age basically. And I didn't really have that. So it was kind of, it was something I had to get acclimated to, I guess, ways to unwind, more constructive ways to unwind. But, some of them were veterans, not many, obviously, but some were, and, we related. But, again, you had a common goal. And the law enforcement profession, is a calling. So you all have something to relate to there. So there weren't any barriers, so to speak.
You have other veterans within the department.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of advantageous, isn't it, having those?
I think it is. We have a few combat veterans, and we're pretty much split between Army veterans and Marine Corps veterans. I don't know if we have a lot of other branches right now, but you have something to relate to. Especially there's a couple that went to the same parts of the world as I did, so twice, some of them. So.
Right. But it's interesting. You can relate to them. Some other people are good, but you have a little extra bond with them.
Right.
I know you have administrative staff, including in the jail, that were in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
You have other people in patrol that were in Iraq.
Correct.
It's interesting. Your training and your leadership, advantageous, do you feel, in your career?
I do. Absolutely. Law enforcement also is full of unknowns. So, any situation could be as it was reported and could be not even almost as it was reported. So, y'all had that in the military as well, and I think adaptation and seeing something through to the end are probably two of the biggest qualities that you can bring.
Plus leadership. You're also on the city council.
I am.
Anything in your experience from law enforcement that helps you in that realm also?
Taking heat. You know, that's probably one of the harder jobs, I would say, because there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. You know, even though we're nonpartisan and I like that, there's still obviously people that are going to disagree with you, or maybe you're neutral on a topic and you kind of get it from both sides, and you have to make a decision. But you know, ultimately, you can't make everyone happy, and accepting that is one of the hardest things. But I just do what I think is right, and I stick to that.
One of the funniest things you remember about your time in service?
Funniest? Well, there's a lot of them I probably can't say, but getting back from a deployment is always a good time because there are a lot of antics, and sometimes pranks that are pulled have unintended consequences, like when someone of a high rank happens to come along. I got we had a Christmas party in Kosovo at Camp Bonsteel, and I was presented my Christmas present in front of the company commander, the first sergeant, my squad leader, pretty much the whole company. And it was a Barbie doll that someone bought me at the PX. So, because we did Secret Santa. So, even though I was the brunt of that joke, it was memorable. So,
You see any USO shows over there?
There was, as a matter of fact. We were on a patrol. We came to another camp for chow, and now I cannot remember for the life of me who it was, but it was someone. It was a relatively famous singer. But anyway, they were there. I didn't attend any myself, but they did have them.
Kind of a morale booster.
Everyone came out to it, you know. So it's yeah. I think things like that are important, and you know, especially when you have maybe politicians checking in. I'm not saying they have to go in country, obviously, but it's nice to know that the people standing there, you know, have your back. So,
Go to any reunions at all? The unit?
No, we don't. I know of a reservist that deployed there. Has reunions, but maybe I don't know if that's uncommon more for active duty personnel, because you're kind of changing all the time. You know, people get reassigned or separate, and then new people come in, and you often have multiple different, you know, if you stay in 20 years, you know, you have several different assignments, all different people. So there are a few I stay in touch with through social media.
Anything else you'd like to talk about? Your time in service, your time at the sheriff's department, your political life?
Well, we'll keep the politics out of it, I think.
Okay.
But no, you know, just everything in general. You know, kind of one thing kind of blends into another, and I notice that going through life, you draw on past experiences, and there's nothing different with me really than anybody else. So just do what you can.
Joe, thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for watching.